So later on in this episode of Newscast, we're going to be talking about something that you could perhaps classify as a political stunt, which is an opportunity for us all to revisit our favourite political stunts. Or maybe not favourite, because we don't have any views, obviously.
No.
Ones that we really remember.
I just think when you say political stunt, there's only one name that springs to mind, which is Ed Davey, because you can pick your stunt. I mean, what is it? Paddleboard, kayak, canoe, inflatable water slide, roller coaster. He's become like the political stunt man of Westminster.
Evil Knievel.
The Tom Cruise of Westminster.
He'd love that.
Oh, absolutely. Although, have you seen the new Mission Impossible? Because he actually does run past Parliament. Tom Cruise,
I thought you just said Davey was in it for a minute there.
He's the baddie. Oh, James, one from the archives, maybe.
Thank you. I mean, my favourite. One of my many favourites is of course the pink bus. Do you remember?
Oh, Harriet
Harmer's pink
2015 election.
And the reason that sticks in my mind is because my way of processing mad political events is to write little poems about them, which of course are utterly unpublished until one day when I ceased to write. But I remembered, because when you thought political science, and I remember, I actually wrote a little poem about Harriet's bus, which is never before.
But you're going to perform it for us now?
Can I reveal? I said if I can remember it right. I probably haven't got its word perfect, but it says,
okay.
It was the people's bus is deepest pink. Oh, what would our martyrs think? The revolution they began lives on now in a minivan. So raise a glass for Harriet and her magenta chariot. Though MPs wince and critics sneer, we'll give the Barbie bus a cheer.
Wow.
There you go.
Oh,
That's never been said before.
Also, James, I hate to break it to you. That's not a poem. That's a song.
Well, you know what I mean. It's like that. But I do it with a lot of things like that.
Okay.
It's
He's got
my
one
way
about you.
It's my way of processing stuff when I just need to sort of, just sort of have a laugh.
I can't wait for this book of poetry.
I know. How many years do we have to wait?
Well, it depends when I get fired, doesn't it, really?
Let's see how this episode goes. Vicki, it's also your last day as Deputy Political Editor, so this one is now freighted with historical significance.
It is. It's because of what it says of some of the people in it. So the Ed Stone.
Yes.
With Ed Miliband, and it just became this dreadful kind of symbol of things that were going wrong. And then it went missing, didn't it? Where had it gone? And then for years it was like, has anyone found the Ed Stone? And I think they did find the Ed Stone somewhere.
Right. News from today on this episode of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
Hello, it's Alex in the studio.
And it's James, also in the studio.
And Vicki, also in the studio.
And yeah, Vicki, how does it feel, your last day as Deputy Political Editor?
It's very strange. Everyone keeps saying you're leaving. Obviously, I'm not actually leaving, so I'm going on to do a different job, presenting Politics Live. So in terms of the BBC building, I will be in the same building.
With the same people.
With the same people, pretty much. I'll just be sitting on a slightly different side of the aisle. So it doesn't feel like I'm leaving, but it is a very different job, actually. Yeah.
And you won't be on the 10 o'clock news anymore, so you'll be able to get home at a reasonable time.
Yeah, slightly earlier in the morning, but yeah, no standing outside in the wind and the rain on that balcony that people see you on, and you do something and then your friends all get message and go, why did they make you stand outside in the rain? Your hair looks awful.
Well,
that kind of feedback.
I'll still be doing that.
I just tend to get, why are you wearing that tie?
It's good that people are listening.
Right, well, let's get you to do the day job for one last time. Why was Keir Starmer in a factory in the northwest of England today, not talking about the economy or trade deals, although he did refer to them, but actually a speech where every other line was about Nigel Farage?
Yeah, and it's absolutely fascinating that obviously he's Prime Minister, he's got a lot on, but he cleared his diary, set up an entire event purely to get some of the media there, though that proved quite tricky because of trains and all the rest of it. But, dragged them there and then proceeded to criticise Nigel Farage. And so, it's sort of a risky strategy in some ways, isn't it? Because it elevates Nigel Farage. He actually said the choice is between Labour and Reform, basically writing off the Conservatives and saying they're finished. It's now going to be between me and him. So I suppose the risk is that it gives Nigel Farage more credibility. I think what Labour is hoping for is that it means more scrutiny for Reform UK's policies, of which, of course, we had earlier in the week.
Let's scrutinise a little bit of the Prime Minister's remarks.
Can you trust him? Can you trust him with your future? Can you trust him with your jobs? Can you trust him with your mortgages, your pensions, your bills? And he gave the answer on Tuesday, a resounding no. He set out economic plans that contained billions upon billions of completely unfunded spending. Precisely the sort of irresponsible splurge that sent your mortgage costs, your bills, and the cost of living through the roof. It's Liz Truss all over again.
Alex, just expand on what he's getting at there.
So we had earlier on in the week a press conference from Nigel Farage in which he set out a flavour of the party's policy platform. What he was saying signals what they might do if they were to ever form a government. And in it, he announced some things like lifting the cap on benefits for children. So at the moment, there's a limit. So some means-tested benefits were only applied to 2 children. He said he'd scrap that. He'd reverse the winter fuel payment in full. He reiterated the party's position on income tax, which is that you wouldn't start paying it till you earn £20,000. When you add all of that up, it runs into the billions. And Nigel Farage pointed to some things that he said he would do to try and claw back some of that money to pay for it, like getting rid of diversity schemes, ending hotel accommodation for asylum seekers, getting rid of Quango's wasteful spending, net zero. Without spelling out a lot of the detail, it has to be said about how exactly you do any of that or how much it would roll up to. And so what now you're seeing the lines, and it's interesting actually because this started earlier on the week because I was at that Nigel Farage press conference, and on the day I was getting messages on my phone from the other parties going, how's he going to pay for this? How's he going to, so the sort of counter briefing started all the way through the week, and it's continued with Keir Starmer today. And what he's effectively trying to do is draw a comparison between Nigel Farage and Liz Truss. And that's, you heard him say it in his speech today. So it is to the point that Vicki made about trying to question the credibility and put the spotlight on scrutiny of Reform UK and some of their policies. But I think the politics around it is quite risky.
Yeah, and he feels he can't ignore him. That's the thing, Starmer. He feels he can't ignore Nigel Farage. Now, if you look at the local election results, the by-election and the recent polls suggesting that Reform are ahead, you can sort of see why he can't ignore it. And you can see where the threat is. You know, for a long time, people have thought, oh, Reform voters, they're all just more right-wing than Conservative voters. The threat is to the Tory party. But actually, I was talking to Luke Trill today, who's a pollster, and he said the people that are attracted, obviously, to Nigel Farage, they're socially conservative, but they're economically more left. They want more intervention. They want more state spending. They want more help. And actually, that's sort of a lot of the red wall areas where Labour are clearly feeling that they're under threat from Nigel Farage.
But the thing is, I mean, I think in terms of the political strategy, I think there's sort of 2 things going on in Downing Street's mind. I think the first thing is they think there might be some benefit in saying, who do you want as your next Prime Minister, Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage? I think that's what the Labour Party think might help Keir Starmer. And I think what they also want to do is something that Nigel Farage and his party want to do, which is sort of render the Conservatives obsolete and redundant and make this a sort of Labour reform battle. But clearly there's dangers in doing that. There's dangers in doing it for the reasons that Vicki said. You are, really lending credibility to Nigel Farage and Reform UK by pointing to them as this sort of electoral force that you have to contend with from a Labour perspective. And that is the response we heard from Reform, which was they're running scared. Why do you think that Keir Starmer is, pulling journalists up here to the northwest to do this? Because they're running scared of us because we're ahead in the polls.
And let's hear from Zia Youssef, who is the chairman of Reform, who was responding to that speech.
I think what's clear now is that the British people see that there's a viable alternative. That's why, by the way, Labour, who won a walloping majority, albeit not that much of the vote, but they won a walloping majority last summer, now trail Reform, led by Nigel, by 8 points in the gold standard YouGov poll. There is finally an alternative to the 2 old parties that consistently prioritise the interests of foreign citizens over the interests of citizens of the United Kingdom. They see in Nigel someone who's going to put them first, and every penny of British taxpayers' money will be spent on improving the lives of British people.
James, as a fellow former deputy political editor alongside Vicki,
It's a great club.
yeah, I mean it's exclusive. It's exclusive. John Pienaar, come on anytime. Leave the rival radio station and come speak to us. Does this actually feel strangely familiar? Has this been the playbook that other people have done in previous eras, when actually it was Nigel Farage that they were trying to bring down as well? Or
Yeah, I mean, look, it has.
Or are we in a new era?
No, to me, it seems incredibly. I remember
Familiar.
the comparison that David Cameron had, and the attempt by David Cameron to sort of mock UKIP as it was then, that backfired. And what I find really interesting by the Downing Street strategy is their belief that somehow having a prime minister sort of critique orally in a speech his political opponent and sort of say, oh, well, he's going to be like Liz Truss, that somehow that is an effective tool. And that works with voters, that they respond to that kind of messaging. Whereas quite a lot of the time, the audience doesn't like other politicians. They find it more effective, if you have proxies, other voices saying that. And actually, the government or the political opponent of the day does better by demonstrating its ability to get onto some of their opponent's territory and steal some of their issues. And so that's what I find really interesting by this, is it's so explicit rather than implicit as a political strategy. And it always struck me that the best way to deal with Nigel Farage or in the populist arguments in the space that I operate in, globally, the more effective political messaging is where you don't just sort of shout at the populist side of the political fence. You just co-opt some of their issues. You tacitly say they're right to acknowledge some of these issues are political issues, whether they are crime or immigration or alienation from the economic process, whatever. But you just provide different answers to those political problems. And I think that's where I, as a sort of, observer from the political scene from a distance, I sometimes struggle to find what the other parties are saying to actually address some of those issues where you have reform getting onto bits of territory. And I think that's what's interesting when I was watching the speech today.
I think two things. One, it seems like quite an old school way of doing it. Like this is quite an old tool from the playbook. And secondly, I'm thinking about that bit in Tony Blair's autobiography that gets reposted on social media every now and then, where he says the best way to take down your opponent is to be subtle and not be totally explicit and like make giant claims to them. It's to undermine them subtly in a way that kind of resonates with people subconsciously rather than hammering your opponent.
Of which his line against William Hague was great jokes but no substance, was very effective at undermining William Hague's leadership when he was, leader of the Conservative Party.
And on the kind of explicitness of this, I mean, today was very obvious from Downing Street what they were trying to do. Keir Starmer went there and there was no policy to this speech at all.
The whole thing was organised just for that purpose.
Yeah, but we have seen this in Prime Minister's questions as well. Increasingly, Keir Starmer will find an opportunity during Prime Minister's questions, whether or not Nigel Farage is there or standing up and asking a question himself, to try and land a blow on Reform UK. All part of the same strategy.
Now, talk about something a bit more modern from the playbook, which is posting a quite captivating video on social media, which is what Robert Jenrick has done today, the Shadow Justice Secretary, where he has gone kind of a bit Batman and he is confronting people who he thinks has dodged their fare on the London Underground. And have a little listen to how that sounds.
Excuse me, do you think it's all right not to pay? Seriously, why do you go back through the barrier and pay? Do you want to go back and pay like everybody else? Do you think it's all right not to pay? Why don't you go back and pay?
So...
I would say it's got people talking,
Yeah.
hasn't it? I mean, I think if you obviously live in a city where that kind of commuting is going on a lot, you see it and everyone has a view about that. And, you also have people trying to tailgate behind you. It really irritates people, doesn't it? I mean, I just think he's trying to get noticed, okay? So his critics would say he's trying to get noticed because he wants to be the leader of the party, but he's trying to get his party noticed, trying to cut through at a time when we keep saying no one's really listening to the Conservatives. And maybe it's just that kind of issue that he looks like someone who's taking control of a situation and trying to do something about it.
Transport for London say that fare dodging was about 4%. It's gone down to 3.4%, and they've got a target for the end of the decade to get it down to 1.5%. So they would argue they're on the case as well. It's not just Robert Jenrick. Alex, what was your diagnosis
Well, it's quite
of that?
interesting that he's not a London MP and he decided to go into London and do this for a first off. But I think the danger for Robert Jenrick is sort of what we were saying about the approach of Labour to reform, is that it's quite obvious what he's trying to do here. Do you know what I mean? For a while, people have been speculating. Nobody needs to speculate because Robert Jenrick stood for the Conservative Party leadership before. So he clearly has an ambition at some point to be the leader of the Conservative Party. Now, he was asked about this today, and he very clearly and has publicly backed Kemi Badenoch and said she's going to be the person that takes him into the election. But, you speak to anybody in Westminster and they will assume that rightly or wrongly, they will assume that Robert Jenrick still harbours leadership ambitions. And he does a lot of this stuff where he's sort of putting himself out there front and centre. He may well capture attention. He is, and the Conservatives are, trying to fight for some airtime in a space where they're in danger sometimes of getting crowded out, particularly now you've got Reform and Labour toe-to-toe against each other and trying to elbow the Conservatives out. So for all of those reasons, he's trying to do something eye-catching, but it is pretty obvious as well.
It is trying to get some attention. I don't know if he really thinks there'll be a policy change or anything. I think it's much more that populist thing of, here's someone trying to do something about something that's really very annoying. And the idea that there's all the people following the rules and then there's those who don't follow the rules and they're getting away with it. That view that some people might have about lots of different areas. And maybe he's trying to tap into that, but I'm not sure exactly what he thinks he might get at.
Of course, he's sort of operating in an environment at the moment where the party leadership, Kemi Badenoch, has been very deliberate in not advancing a policy platform from the Conservatives. That was her pitch when she stood to be the leader of the party, was I'm going to take my time to develop a policy platform because I think we need to go back to first principles, have a real think about what the party stands for. But there are definitely some in the Conservative Party that think that's creating a bit of a vacuum. And in that vacuum, you find Robert Jenrick sort of going off on his own and banging the drum on the issues that he thinks are important to whatever end. I mean, whether or not he gets some sort of policy change out of this, whether he gets a little bit of popular support, or whether or not he just gets his name talked about again on podcasts. I mean, either way.
Look, guilty.
I just think on a very, very basic level, talking to Conservative contacts of mine in my world, is they just think the Conservative Party is not doing the basic job of opposition at the moment, of actually just having people, because I don't think there are that many people in the shadow cabinet who were around last time the Conservatives were in opposition, and have that sort of experience of how you do this, of where you make the scrutiny work, how you just place all these landmines around the place, dot them around for the government to trip over. So I think there will be some Conservatives out there.
And actually, that's not glitzy eye-catching.
No, and it's not glitzy. It is hard work. It's hard graft. It is about pushing for things. It's about getting in the right place. And these days, if that means doing the odd stunt, and putting out a little video like that, that's part of the package.
And it's also about making your best use of Parliament, right? Because you have to navigate the kind of way that Parliament works and use it to maximum effect. And we know there have been some very efficient parliamentarians who know how to make it work in their favour. And of course, the other point of focus for Kemi Badenoch is when she gets that slot of Prime Minister's questions every week, does she make the best use of it? Question mark.
And on that note, Chris Mason and Henry Zeffman have written a BBC in-depth piece for the website today about all these issues. And you can press a button and Henry will read it to you.
Yeah, he read
like
it to me earlier.
like an audiobook.
Not just to me.
I was going to say, did you get a personal reading?
No,
of your last
in the,
day?
You could just
in the
phone
office,
him.
he said,
Phone
your last
a leaving
day.
gift.
Right, James, on the international scene, so Trump threw the world trade system into chaos on the 2nd of April with his tariffs and his big cardboard board of import taxes on everyone. But now his policy's been thrown into chaos by some judges in America. It's just mind-boggling. And I'm not even an exporter to America. I don't sell anything to America.
Look, it's what we're seeing slowly but surely is the reassertion of checks and balances within the political system. You're gonna see it in Congress as the Democrats begin to get their act together, and some Republicans begin to think, "Crikey, am I going to win my seat next time round if this tariff thing goes south?" But you're also seeing a little bit more sort of flexing of the judicial muscles within the American system, and we're seeing that in the row between the government and the universities, but we're also now seeing it on the economic front. And some US judges have basically said that the fundamental principle of part of Trump's tariff policy is unconstitutional because he's not following the right rules. Essentially, the argument that Trump used was that under certain emergency laws, I'm allowed to impose these tariffs. That's an exceptional thing because in theory, Congress is in charge of spending cash in the American system, and that was a way that Trump got round it. So there's now a legal battle, and that will ensue. Does it change anything? Look, I think if you're an international business person running a company, you're just going to think this is yet more uncertainty. But if you think about it, Donald Trump has changed his mind a lot on tariffs. You've now got a court forcing him to change his mind, potentially for a bit, or maybe not, depending on what the outcome is. So what it means is yet more uncertainty.
I mean, the interesting thing that we sort of discovered, I think, is that the trade deal that's been done hasn't been implemented yet between the UK and the
And some people
US.
say it's not even a trade deal. You can't even call it that.
No, it's yes, a mini trade deal. But if that's not even in
Agreement,
place,
compact.
I think the issue is now whether there's just more chaos and therefore the American administration is so distracted. Does that ever get over the line? And
That's the good point is it's potentially we could end up having our exemption, our reduction of tariffs on steel and cars. That's tick, and potentially we lose the 10% baseline tick. So potentially that's good. The risk is that this legal uncertainty means that our own UK-US compact agreement deal, whatever we want to call it, doesn't actually come into force as quickly as we thought it was. And we don't get that exemption that is so important for companies like JLR and others.
And presumably what it also does is, because obviously if you believe Donald Trump and what he said about this, part of the reason for the tariffs in the first place at the level they were was to force the hand of other countries to come to the table so he could negotiate trade deals with them. And presumably what this does now, legal uncertainty pending, so we don't know what the outcome will be. But either way you look at it, it appears to strengthen the hand of the countries that now want to still negotiate some sort of trade deal with Donald Trump and weaken the hand of Donald Trump himself.
I also wonder if the next big American thing we're going to be talking about is America's national debt, which is currently at $37 trillion. And if that only just sustainable, but if that then becomes unsustainable and the people that lend to the American government start asking for higher interest on that debt, that will be the big economic story. And guess the country whose debt is most closely linked to the interest rate on American debt? The UK. And imagine this is all happening. It all comes to a head in, I don't know, September, October, just
What's
before,
going on in the
just
autumn,
before
Adam?
Rachel Reeves's budget.
Is there a budget?
I can see that all sort of playing out, and then maybe this thing today will seem quite like a sideshow, even though it's absolutely massive. James, just on another kind of international issue, such a hardening of many governments' approach to Israel over the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It's super noticeable.
Yeah, there's definitely been hardening. We saw it this week with the EU High Representative Keir Starmer, being very, very critical of what was happening in Gaza, and also just saying that Israel's tactics are just no longer acceptable. You heard that also echoed by the new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz. That comes off the back of the UK, French and Canadians saying that what was happening in Gaza is intolerable. So there is this hardening of the rhetoric. The question I've got is, what will that actually mean in practice? Because, we've heard quite a lot of the Europeans sort of, expressing their concerns. Does that mean that the Europeans and others are going now to put serious sanctions on not just some, settlers in the West Bank, but also on Israeli ministers for what's happening there and elsewhere? Are we going to see greater sectoral sanctions? Are we going to even see a discussion about the recognition of the state of Palestine? There's a big conference in New York next month that's been organised by the French and the Saudis, and they are reviving talk of a two-state solution. Now, to have a two-state solution, you've got to have some, sense that you're going to have a state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel. Now, we've had news today that the Israelis are authorizing yet more settlements which are designed in practice to make it harder for a separate Palestinian state to be viable. Now, where do we get in September? I don't know. If you talk to ambassadors, they say, yeah, there'll be lots of talk, but actually there's not enough agreement at the moment for there to be that. The balance Western policymakers have got to get is if they put more pressure on the Israelis, does that unite the Israelis? Because if they go at the moment, there are clearly divisions in Israeli society, and if you talk to some Israeli officials, they talk about they're working for their people, for their country, not their government. They sometimes make that linguistic difference. And you've had two former Israeli prime ministers say that what's happening in Gaza at the moment are war crimes now, and they, as well as the families of the hostages and others who genuinely just think what's happening is horrific. So how does the West enter and put pressure on the Netanyahu government without having the Israeli people and others rally round that government if it feels it's yet more isolated? So it's a balancing act. So yes, the Western line is hardening. I wait to see what that means in practice.
And then as we're recording this episode of Newscast on Thursday night, there's the usual sort of swirling rumours that there might be a new ceasefire being discussed. But I'm thinking back to the episode of Newscast me and Alex did on Monday at the Hay Festival when Anne Applebaum, the Pulitzer Prize winning author and journalist and historian, was talking about a different conflict, Ukraine and Russia. And she said, just focus on actual facts. There's too much of like, this is happening, this meeting's happening, this meeting's happening. It's like, actually, there isn't a ceasefire. There's some chatter about some ceasefire, but there still isn't one.
Yeah, I mean, there is the latest suggestion is that the Americans, in the form of Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's envoy, has got a plan. It would involve some handover of some of the remaining live hostages and some of the remains of those who are dead. Alongside some kind of 60-day ceasefire. But there is a suggestion that the Israelis have signed up to it, but not Hamas, because it doesn't involve any long-term permanent end to the fighting, which is a pretty strong red line for Hamas, because they don't want to agree to something only to find the Israelis, keep firing. As you say, we've been here before. We've seen lots of talk. It remains to be seen precisely where this gets us. If you remember, we began at the beginning of this year. We had lots of talks about 3 stages, different phases, and what was going to happen, and those dramatic moments, and it's all just dissipated, and the suffering has continued. And
just to be clear, I'm not saying activity is unimportant. I'm just making it clear activity is activity, and facts are different. Now, Vicky, I didn't get you a leaving present.
What?
Because
why don't you read out an article?
Because you're just moving. Yeah. What we could do is they released today the gifts that Keir Starmer's received recently. Oh. So my gift to you is reading out the list of Keir Starmer's
worst gift ever.
It's just a really bad link.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So he got a bottle of rum from the Prime Minister of Barbados. He got a decorative marble plate from the Prime Minister of India. He got a hamper from Giorgio Meloni of Italy, which he then bought from the government so he could eat himself. He got a replica trophy football shirt and football from Arsene Wenger. But my favourite one is he got a personalised chopping board.
Oh, that's why in the office, a couple of our colleagues were going, I got a personalised chopping board for a wedding present.
I've got a personalised chopping board. Yeah,
how's it personalised?
Exactly.
It's got my name on it.
I was wondering if it had your face on it and then you spend your whole time chopping up your face.
No, it was a when I got my house, when I bought my first house.
I've never seen
bought me a chopping board with my name on it.
Anyway, Vicky, would you like to do a plug for your new programme, which is actually an existing programme, but you're going to revolutionise it?
Well, it's an existing programme, yes. Politics Live, and it's on Monday to Thursday, and it starts at 12:15, although on a Wednesday it's earlier, and we cover Prime Minister's questions. And it's a lot of opinion, a lot of debate, a lot of politics, and you should definitely tune in.
Well, break a leg.
And you will be missed because Vicki on the news side of the newsroom is a brilliant colleague and a great person to work with. So even though she'll be across the room and we'll wave, she'll be missed in the fray.
Oh, thank you. You'll still hear my voice bellowing out across the newsroom.
Good, glad to hear it. Right, that's it for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.
Newscast from the BBC.